we had completed presentations from states, and we are now moving to presentations from international organizations. We have working paper 170 by Council. Would you please present?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon to you all. Council would like to thank you for letting me introduce working paper 170 on the UTM and air traffic management collaboration. Council sees the development of UTM next to or integrated into ATM as one of the big challenges today. To be able to maintain the high level of safety we have today in commercial aviation and to allow the new developments of UAS grow, we have to make sure UTM and ATM operators work in coordination to make this happen. When a UTM system is developed or installed close to boundaries of controlled airspace, this may lead to unwanted interactions between UTM and ATM traffic. For this reason, CANSO asked the conference to advise states to make sure that approved national UTM systems are interoperable with an existing ATM system, and it can be demonstrated to be at an equivalent level of safety and are compliant with the rules of the airspace. Any UTM service interface must be designed to be compatible with the existing ATM data requirements and must only require the minimum of changes to ATM service. The establishment of this interface and the provision of UTM information must be at no or little cost of the ATM service providers and must comply with all aspects of cybersecurity necessary to ensure the ongoing integrity of the ATM service. However, UTM traffic shall only be visible by air traffic controllers when there might be a possibility for conflicts with ATM traffic, not to overload air traffic controllers. CANSO is excited about the opportunity to embrace new technologies, provided there is a concerted effort to maintain the existing and well-established levels of safety enjoyed today. CANSO and its members stand ready to assist in furthering the advent of this capability. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Council. May I have a show of support for this working paper to be discussed? Thank you. We now move to working paper 168 by ICCAIA, IFATCA, and IFALPA. Would you please present?
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. Working paper 168, concepts to enable drone operations to seamlessly integrate with air traffic management, calls for the creation and global harmonization of design standards and cyber resiliency for UTM systems to ensure interoperability with existing ATM systems. We agree with the strategic principles established by the Secretariat in Working Paper 5, as well as those established by Eurocontrol in Working Paper 41. It is accepted that UTM and traditional manned aviation will coexist in the airspace system. However, as the number of entrants into aviation through the development and proliferation of UTM increases, the global aviation community must remain diligent when it comes to acceptable design standards and cyber resiliency. As discussed in this paper, UTM solutions must strike a balance between innovations gained from UAS manufacturers and operators while satisfying the needs of civil regulators and ANSPs alike. The perspectives of both can be incorporated, even if done incrementally. This is why ICCAIA, CANSO, IFATCA, and IFALPA collectively support the establishment of a framework for registration, identification, design standards, acceptance, and core services to ensure safety within the airspace system. Core services are determined as those services required by all states to maintain the airspace safety and security versus the other airspace users and ground population. By design, core services should have a high level of design integrity, be provided by the entity responsible for the airspace safety and management in a fair and equitable manner. Two examples of core services include geofencing, data validated and distributed by a national authority as a data distribution service to protect critical infrastructure, military, or to impose restrictions based on special events, and a national vehicle and operator registry maintained by a national authority and is in line with ICAO's vision to curb the increasing privacy concerns among the public, as well as fears of accidents between commercial aviation and drones. With that, Mr. Chairman, we invite the conference to agree to the following recommendations. The conference A invites states to note that The implementation of drone capability levels will help add clarity to the airspace system development at low altitudes and provide a mechanism to allow for performance-based airspace access. B, request ICAO to continue to develop comprehensive electronic registration mechanisms and database structures capable of supporting remote identification and pilot capability and qualification information. C, urge states to mandate an acceptable approach for the implementation of development standards that incorporate robust software and hardware guidelines that are consistent with aviation industry norms. D, urge states to encourage UTM providers to implement the highest level of cybersecurity standards that are consistent with aviation community expectations and guidelines for low-altitude airspace operations. Before continuing to the last recommendation, E, I'd like to suggest a wording change to the final recommendation. The unfortunate use of the word centralized was used in the recommendation. Centralized should be replaced by core in reference to some of the services referenced. The intent was not to prescribe any particular architecture or design, but to highlight there are important services required for effective UTM provisions that should remain core to any system design, as these services are integral to safety and security. These functions should be provided by a unique, authoritative service provider for any volume of airspace at any given time. There's nothing in this revised description that precludes distributed services, tiered services, outsourced services, or competitive services provisions, except that there should only be one service provider for any one volume of airspace at any one time. It should be noted that the more distributed and tiered the service, the more complex the coordination required to ensure the smooth and effective access and management of operations. Finally, recommendation E should state, urge states to implement core airspace management services, including but not limited to geofencing and georeferencing, to ensure that UTM operators have validated data sources to plan and execute missions within the airspace system. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, ICCAIA. The amendment is noted. I draw your attention to working papers 51, 118, and 181 as information papers on this topic. I now invite the Secretariat to make any clarification.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And there are a couple clarifications that I'd like to give on two of the working papers. So first, related to working paper 54, which made note of the fact that the Assembly had requested that ICAO undertake an innovative and flexible approach to addressing unmanned aircraft systems that remain outside of the IFR international framework. And that a second point to that is that the Assembly also requested that ICAO develop a global baseline of provisions and guidance material for the proper harmonization of UAS regulations, again, that remain outside of the instrument flight rules framework. So ICAO has been undertaking this through the drone-enabled conferences, reaching out directly to industry for that input. There is some material that the UAS advisory group that has developed that may be ready to be incorporated into the GAN-P as proposed in working paper 54. However, much of the material that has been developed is guidance material and therefore would not be appropriate to put into such a high-level document. Now, regarding the working paper 56, this has a very different request of ICAO. It was that ICAO identify a solution that will allow states to approve operations of unmanned aircraft in high seas airspace. So I'd like to provide a little background on why this request was made. The Chicago Convention requires that aircraft engaged in international navigation have a certificate of airworthiness which is understood to have been issued in accordance with Annex 8, as well as to carry all its documents on board. These requirements are contained in articles of the Convention Therefore, they cannot be ignored. Currently, all unmanned aircraft that do not possess a certificate of airworthiness and carrying their documents on board are to be prohibited from operating in high seas airspace by the state of the operator or state of the registration. This is not seen as an appropriate prohibition in today's environment. Now, in 1981, the Council adopted a standard in Annex 2 that provides a blanket approval for certain balloons to operate internationally, including in high seas airspace, without complying with various articles of the Convention. The state supported this blanket approval when the amendment was proposed, or when it was circulated. A working paper 56 is proposing that ICAO and its member states essentially followed this same path, wherein an amendment to Annex 2, the rules of the air, would allow states to issue approvals for operations in high seas airspace under certain conditions, including that they remain clear of manned aircraft and other third parties, and that they employ safety management to identify hazards and risks and acceptable mitigations. So this is what has been discussed between the Legal Committee, the Legal Bureau, and the Air Navigation Bureau. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. With that, I open the floor for discussions. Mexico.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, Chairman. First, I would like to support the conclusions and recommendation in paper 54. I am grateful for the Secretariat's clarifications on working paper 54, and although it's not entirely as clear as it might be, it does refer to the gap, and the provisions are probably not mature enough as regards the UTM regulatory framework. And also in working paper 54, recommendation C, the redirection of UASAG. I think at this time this proposal needs to be considered more in depth, since we are still examining the possible scope of the current group that's addressing this work. And I believe that their scope is restricted to other unmanned aircraft. On paper 168, I take account of Secretariat's comments. I believe that this might be a way forward. However, in the paper, there is an argument for UAS over the high seas, and I think there might be interdependencies involved. And the problem of unlawful interference. I think the proposals in working paper 56 might be taken into consideration on this score. I support the content of the paper by Brazil, and the action items in the paper I think could be given due consideration by ICAO, as well as the recommendations in paper 41. I support 168, and I also support the conclusions of working paper 170. Thank you.
Thank you, Mexico. Switzerland.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. Switzerland supports working paper 5 presented by the Secretariat. We welcome ICAO's activities as a global facilitator to support the development of new range of aviation activities, such as unmanned aircraft. It is of utmost importance to include states, regional cooperation frameworks, industry, academia, and other concerned stakeholders to collaborate in tackling these new emerging issues, such as development of UAS traffic management systems and the services they will provide in the future. With regard to recommendation F, we would strongly advocate to defer any discussions on the budgetary aspects to the next ICAO General Assembly. Therefore, we propose to delete this recommendation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ayata.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon to all. IATA supports Working Paper 97 by the UAE and 170 by Council. Regarding Working Paper 54, we do support the proposal to bring UAS into the mainstream of the ICAO process. UAS technology will evolve and inevitably require more airspace, encroaching further on areas of aircraft operations. In addition, as UTM technology develops, it may present solutions for safe operations by UAS as well as manned aircraft. We do not agree, however, with the sunsetting of the UAS advisory group. It should remain and evolve into a forum for assessment of UTM development and maturity, identifying the elements which become ready to become part of the ICAO framework and eventually the GAMP itself. This might require attracting participation from areas of the industry which do not regularly take part in the ICAO standard-making process, and this was already mentioned. We support exploring these options in order to retain ICAO's role as the global standard-making body for all airspace activities. Regarding Working Paper 56, it presents an example of further work required by ICAO to cover UAS activities, which are increasingly becoming a mainstream tool for state and commercial activities. In order for these activities to evolve in a safe manner, while not being excessively hindered by regulatory restrictions, we believe it appropriate for ICAO to develop initial provisions to facilitate these operations over high seas, as opposed to just establishing blanket approvals with national requirements, which could lead to non-harmonized procedures. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ayato. New Zealand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. New Zealand would like to support Working Paper 5 by the Secretariat. The paper speaks to the need for standards and recommended practices that enable harmonised approaches to UTM. New Zealand would also like to support Working Papers 54 by the United States and Working Paper 168 by the ICCAIA. Both papers speak to the need for global and harmonised approaches with respect to both UAS and UTM. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, New Zealand. Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The US and RPAS do not currently fall under the SAPs of ICAO, in particular Annexes 1, 6, or 8, and the aviation industry is forced to respond to these threats presented by these systems. It may be timely for ICAO to take another look at how these systems can be incorporated into the aviation environment, as US and RPAS, etc., are largely disruptors to aviation. The question is, where do these systems fit in the overall aviation environment so that a holistic approach can be implemented? A study group should be established. It is recommended that in response to the paper presented by the United States, a study group should be established to determine the way forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Trinidad and Tobago. Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We support Working Paper 54 as presented by the United States and welcome the clarification brought by the United States before lunch regarding Recommendation C, as is seemingly contradicted to a certain extent Recommendations B and D. We fully support the Recommendations A, B and former D on the principle of integrating the work of the UAS Advisory Group into the GAMP structure in order to clearly mark that we aim to integrate and find opportunities for these types of users and their operations. Following the presentation of the paper by the United States, we agree with the implication that the terms of reference of the UAS Advisory Group need to be revised and that a formal mandate of the group is agreed upon in full transparency. We are of the opinion that if further work is carried out, and it should be done in close collaboration with states and relevant industry that have already begun deployment. Thank you.
Thank you. Australia.
Thank you, Chair. In relation to Working Paper 5, we support all the recommendations. However, we'd like a qualification on Recommendation 3.1d, the request that ICAO expedite development of the global aircraft registry network. That issue will raise a lot of legal, jurisdictional and governance issues. So, and I know there's a lot of work going on in the UAS world. So I think the Secretariat might be assisted and may be assisted in writing up the report for this agenda item and the item after this, to be clear what groups currently work on UAS issues in ICAO. Because there's been suggestion already of a study group, there's further work to be done, there's expediting work. There's some fundamental work that has to be done, as I understand it, on the SARPs. And we've got information being sought here on guidance material, and so I think it would be really helpful for this conference to be given a clear explanation of the current work going on in ICAO on UAS. Secondly, Chair, Working Paper 168, Recommendation 3.2, requests ICAO continue to develop a comprehensive electronic registration mechanism. Not normally work done by ICAO, I'd have to say, but nevertheless, I think maybe that needs to find a home somewhere else, because normally states would have that type of responsibility. But I'll leave that in the hands of the Secretariat to respond to that one. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Australia. China.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everybody. The China's delegation supports Working Paper number 5 presented by the Secretariat. We also support Working Paper number 88 presented by Brazil. Regional initiatives and supplementary procedures are beneficial to low elevation UAS operations. For this purpose, the Asia and Pacific region has already established a task force for this purpose. We hope that the task force will continue to receive support from the ICAO headquarters. Thank you.
Thank you, China. Singapore.
Thank you, Chairman. And Singapore would like to support the recommendation in Working Paper 5 by the Secretariat on the collection and sharing of information, as it helps states to shorten their learning curves for the regulation of unmanned aircraft and to avoid potential pitfalls. For Singapore, we have established a drone estate, which is a regulatory sandbox for operators to facilitate the trial of innovative UAS technologies and commercial use cases in a controlled urban environment. And we have also issued a call for proposal to identify and operationalize innovative use of UAS-related technologies, and we will be happy to share more on the lessons learned upon the completion of the projects. At the same time, we will also support the recommendation in Working Paper 168 by ICCAIA on the implementation for drone capability levels, as it provides a mechanism to allow for performance-based airspace access for unmanned aircraft. Singapore also supports the implementation of core airspace management services to ensure that UTM operators have access to accurate and validated data. We believe that these initiatives are critical enablers towards the safe and effective integration of UAS into controlled airspace. Thank you.
Thank you. Ghana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ghana would like to support the Working Paper 5 presented by the Secretariat, addressing the emergence of a range of new aviation activities in very low altitude airspace, typically at 1,000 feet above ground level and below, in urban or suburban environments. We support Recommendation A, encouraging ICAO to contribute to the development of operational solutions and guidance to support the safe and coordinated development of aviation activities at those low altitudes. Ghana also supports Recommendation G of this paper, which requests ICAO to encourage and facilitate exchange of information among member states. We believe that this will enable stakeholders to optimize the benefits of these operations whilst ensuring safe operations. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everyone. Your client supports working paper 5 recommendation presented by the Secretariat. We agree that activity of small unmanned aircraft operating typically at 1,000 feet above ground level and below requires working out of operational solution again to support the safe and coordinated development of aviation activity at low altitude, in particular in urban and suburban environments, including in the vicinity of airport. Ukraine believes that common participation of all stakeholders will bring issue regarding unmanned aircraft operation on the appropriate level of safety. Therefore, we welcome the leading role of ICAO in this activity. Ukraine would like to support working paper 5.6 presented by the Ukrainians or by the United States and corresponding development of a solution to approve operation over the high seas by non-certificated UAS. We believe that corresponding operational procedural and associated guidance material will provide state and or the appropriate authorities with the possibility to expand UAS operation in the high seas airspace while continuing to ensure the safety of our aircraft operations in this airspace. At the same time, we would like to suggest to add some clarification to recommendation in this paper that we address operation at or below 1,000 feet only. Thank you.
Thank you, Ukraine. Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon to all. Greece supports the working paper presented, 5 presented by Secretariat, and also supports the comments raised by Switzerland in the point F of the recommendation Secretariat's paper, as it's better to leave these issues in the capacity of the Assembly. Furthermore, we would like to express our support to working paper 168, presented by ICAO, IFATCA and IFALPA. The integration of UAS operation in the air navigation system is a really challenging issue. In many different levels, a common guidance on the deployment of UTM has to be part of the GAMP in order to support national regulators in their tasks for performance-based regulations and cybersecurity. Furthermore, we believe that states and UTM providers shall be proactive by taking risk-based measures, so we propose rewording on point D of the above-mentioned paper of 168 accordingly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Greece. Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Canada rises to signal support for the amendments tabled by the United States of America on papers 54 and 56, and welcome the leadership on the question. On papers 41 and 168, Canada commends the ambitious paper and framework related to the development of the UTM framework. We'd like to stress the importance to account for national realities that may warrant different responses. And for more information, Mr. Chairperson, I refer you to the information paper tabled by Canada number 118. For the reasons noted by my honorable colleague from Australia on paper 168, Canada would want registration to remain primarily a national effort due to technical limitations and or security reasons, and given that it's a state response under Chicago Convention 1944. This could still be done in a manner that includes standardization and compatibility with the global registry system. Et finalement, Monsieur le Président,
and finally, Chairman, with regard to paper 170, we support the paper, but in paragraph 2.5, Canada would like to place a reservation on the wording. As you know, Canada has an air navigation services provider that is private. It's non-profit and non-capital, which means that it's funded on a cost recovery basis. So insofar as this organization is able to pay for an UTM system, it will need to recover the costs. So it's very important for us to place a reservation on that paragraph. Thank you.
Thank you. Canada, Dominican Republic.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Chairman. The Dominican Republic would like to express its support for Working Paper 5 by the Secretariat, Paper 88 presented by Brazil, and Paper 54 with the corrections. With regard to Paper 56, we are in a position to support this if a vertical limit is inserted for the operations proposed. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, Venezuela.
Gracias.
Thank you, Chairman. The Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela supports Working Paper 5, presented by Secretariat, and the recommendations therein. Also, we support Paper 88 by Brazil, with the modified recommendations in A and C, on the understanding that there's a need to have provisions which will allow for the concept of UAS integration to mature and allow states time to share experiences and initiatives. Thank you.
Saudi Arabia.
Thank you, Chairperson. Saudi Arabia supports Working Paper 5 by the Secretariat and its recommendation. The development of UTM framework by ICAO will support state in managing the growing UAS activities and ensure safe operations. Saudi Arabia also would like to thank UAE for presenting Working Paper 97 and sharing information on the measures taken to manage UAS in controlled airspace. In fact, the adaptation of operational tactical measures is necessary to maintain safe operation or safe provision of ATC in controlled airspace. Also, Saudi Arabia would like to appreciate the other working paper presented under this agenda and would like to emphasize on the need to ensure that UTM framework be part of the GAMP for regional and global harmonization, as UAS should be part of the overall air traffic management. Thank you.
Thank you. United States.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The support for the work of the USAG in the area of defining UTM framework on small UAS and operations below 1,000 feet is noted. We believe, along with, as IATA so eloquently put, that moving the work to the GAMP is still needed. It will put the more accomplished work in the future work and contains many benefits in terms of visibility, structure, and we'd still like to propose that. The current terms of reference for the AG requires a revision. As two of the three tasks have already been completed, and the group still has 5 more years ahead of it according to the current terms of reference. The United States proposes the terms of reference be updated to reflect an incremental approach to UTM integration with an initial focus of understanding concepts of operations, data collection, lessons learned, and states that have already begun UTM development, and share those with states wanting to begin development. These tasks should also take into consideration the need for states and regions to work with industry to test and validate UTM concepts. The experience by multiple states and regions, their lessons learned, and concept of operations must be considered and recorded before moving forward with global provisions. This will allow the UAS AG to develop guidance material based on mature UTM concepts and data collected during the research and development, testing, and validation phases. The current terms of reference calls for multidisciplinary membership of UAS regulatory and operational personnel, ATM, and related industry technical experts. Based on the proposed revised terms of reference, the United States believes it's essential that industry also be active members of the AG. We feel that this is a good compromise between our original proposal and then the comments that have been voiced by the states here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, United States. Rwanda.
Good afternoon. Rwanda supports Working Paper 5 by the Secretariat, taking into account the important comments made by Trinidad and Tobago. We also support Working Paper 54, presented by the United States with recommendations as listed in paragraph 3.1. And Rwanda also supports Working Paper 56 and support the previous state comments regarding establishing proper procedures. Thank you.
Thank you, Rwanda. Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Republic of Korea supports Working Paper 5 by Secretariat and its oral recommendation as therein, and also support Working Paper 5.4 by United States and Working Paper 88 by Brazil. In this regard, I would like to inform that the Korea currently are working with the relevant authorities and stakeholders to develop the USA's Safe Operation Standard and Guidance, and also UTM system and its supporting infrastructure, including communication, navigation, and surveillance system, and also national regulatory scheme to prepare non-segregated airspace management. Thank you.
Thank you. Brazil.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon, Chairman. Brazil fully supports Working Paper 5. We believe ICAO should remain as the facilitator for this type of discussion and promote studies that aim to harmonize initiatives globally. We also support Paper 41 for the same reason, as well as U.S. Paper 54 with the modifications to 3.1.6. As said, we support U.S. Paper 56. With regard to Paper 168, like Canada, we have the same concern. And we fully support CANSO's Working Paper 170. Thank you.
Thank you. Thailand.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon. Thailand also like to support the Working Paper 5 presented by the Secretariat, especially the need for ICAO to lead the development of harmonized approach for the UTM. And we would also like to echo the IATA's interventions regarding the ICAO body to take the responsibility on the UTM framework development. Considering the scope of UTM, we are in the view that the wider expertise currently available within the USAG would be required. However, we welcome the inclusions of UTM-related topics in the GAMS. In addition, we support the Working Paper 170 presented by the Council, particularly the importance on the interoperability between UTM and the ATM system. Thank you.
Thank you. We now have Morocco.
Thank you, Chairman. Good day, everyone. Morocco supports Working Paper 5 from the Secretariat and Working Paper 97 from the United Arab Emirates, which defines recommended practices as well as the updating of the implementation models. We would also like to mention the risk to security that is represented by unmanned aircraft systems. Thank you.
Thank you. Indonesia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Indonesia welcome and strongly support the recommendation in Working Paper 5 presented by Secretary. Here we highlight the request to IQ concerning the contribution to the development of operational solution and guidance to support the safe and coordinated development of aviation activity at low altitude, and the request to IQ to continue developing provision for the proper harmonization and implementation of regulation on UAS. I think this is the recall the discussion in the previous legal committee last month. We also appreciate and support Working Paper 97 by United Arab Emirates concerning the tactical risk management of unauthorized UAV intrusion. It will be lesson learned for the other states, especially for us, in facing the increasing of US operation. And one more, we also support the Working Paper number 88 presented by Brazil. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Cameroon.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon. Cameroon supports Working Paper 5 from the Secretariat, and also WP97 from the UAE, and congratulates them for the evaluation model for tactically assessing risks in order to manage intrusions by unauthorized UASs, among others, in controlled airspace. And this is helpful to states that are seeing an increase in drone traffic in their airspaces. Thank you.
Thank you. Germany.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Being mindful of the information provided by the Secretariat on UAS and the considerations in the legal committee, I'd like first to support the IATA position that we should be refrain from any blanket approvals for UAS. Concerning working paper WP56 from the United States, I think in this respect the recommendations go very much in the right direction to request ICAO as a matter of urgency to develop a solution addressing non-certified UAS and so forth, and also to, in B, to urge states to support ICAO in developing a solution to approve operations over the high seas. Looking to the title of the agenda item 5.2, which refers to operations below 1,000 feet, I do think, and the Ukrainian delegation already made this point, we do miss something in this respect in both recommendations A and B, because they are, when they are separated from this agenda item, completely open. So we think we need a reference to these operations below 1,000 feet, which we would consider in the context of study and work going on, probably as a first step and as a first learning phase from which further on further developments and further studies can be done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Germany. ACI.
Good afternoon. ACI supports the working papers in this block, and particularly would like to refer to working paper 5, the Secretariat's paper, especially point B of the recommendations, which requests ICAO to contribute to the development of operational solutions and guidance to support the safe and coordinated development of aviation activities at low altitude, particularly in urban and suburban environments, including in the vicinity of and into airports. And further, the concerns about unauthorized drone use around airports have not gone away, but we should also welcome opportunities for new and useful aviation activities by UAS, including airport inspection and surveillance activities, and also urban air taxis, which, if allowed, need to be controlled. Lastly, we support IATA's comment that the UAS advisory group should not be closed down. Thank you.
Thank you. ACI. Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for granting Denmark the floor for the second time. On behalf of the 44 European states, we would like to support the comments of Greece on Working Paper 5, specifically with regards to point F on the provision of resources and financing. This is a matter for the ICAO Assembly and is not suitable for discussion at this conference. Further, we do not believe that it is appropriate for ICAO to develop a global aircraft registry network, and ICAO should concentrate on the substantial task of developing the required standards and recommended practices. Thank you.
Thank you, Denmark. Asekna.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Asekna would like to support Working Paper 170 from Canso, and the fact that sovereign airspace and UAS are not separated from current traffic. And there are a number of fundamental ATM principles touched upon here, including classification of airspace. ASECNA, therefore, as a provider of services, is already face-to-face with these issues today in its terminals and does not have a primary radar. And these are emerging issues to be dealt with through procedures on a case-by-case basis with the states involved. This program should involve not only harmonized regulations, as has already been mentioned in WP5 by the Secretariat, but also we call the industry to develop alternatives for detection and visualization of and detection of UAS by airports and other objects that do not have the necessary equipment to detect. We would also like to mention Working Paper 97 UAE, which gives examples of specific methods of management through sharing of information. Thank you.
Thank you, Asegna. Egypt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, all. Arab Republic of Egypt would like to support Working Paper 5 presented by Secretariat and the recommendation from this paper, especially B, E, and G. Also would like to support Working Paper 97 presented by UAE, and we appreciate UAE for all information presented in this paper. Thank you.
Thank you. Belgium.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Belgium would like to support the working paper number 5, including the request from the European countries to delete the issue related to the financial issues. We would also like to support the intervention made by the Germany, requesting the clarification that the high seas airspace meant in the recommendation A and B of the working paper 56 is the airspace below 1,000 feet. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson.
Thank you, Belgium. And we'll take the final comment from the United States and then sum up. United States.
United States, thank you for the feedback on working paper 56. When submitted, it was submitted under the agenda item for 1,000 feet and below. Given the discussions that we had today, 1,000 feet may be appropriate. I agree with IATA support that this needs to be further work needed to be done by ICAO. And when developing the appropriate parameters to ensure the harmonization is done, we may find that 1,000 feet could work, and we may not. It could be a lower altitude needed in that particular area, or an higher altitude could also be approved in certain circumstances. So at this time, we'd like to leave without a specific altitude and let it go to the further work program.
Thank you. In summary, there was broad support from the Committee for Working Paper 5 from the Secretariat with regards to working papers 41, 88, 97, 54, 56, 170, and 168. There was agreement for ICAO to prioritize the development of a solution which will enable states to authorize operations over the high seas by non-certified UAS in a safe manner. The committee recognized the benefits and agreed with the proposed approach to collect and share information regarding very low altitude operations, typically below 1,000 feet. Wide support was provided to the development of operational solutions and guidance to support low altitude activities, particularly in urban and suburban environments as well as near airports. The committee agreed that ICAO should continue serving as a global facilitator and forum in the development of the UTM system framework, as well as continuing with harmonization and implementation of regulation on UAS. The committee agreed that ICAO should continue conducting educational activities among users and facilitate the exchange of information between states regarding regulations for UAS. Are there any remarks to the summary? thank you. The Secretariat will just provide a clarification.
Thank you. Regarding the item on the aircraft registry network, this is actually a very broad activity that includes the manned aviation information as well as unmanned. So what we are understanding from the audience here is that the work on the small unmanned aircraft addition into the aircraft registry should not proceed. So that needs to be understood with working paper 5 that this is referring strictly to the work related to small unmanned aircraft, not the entire ICAO aircraft registry network. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. United States, you had a comment on this summary?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize if I missed it, but I just wanted to note that with our amended intervention, keeping the USAG in existence with an amended terms of reference did have support. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And Ayata?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a follow-up to the intervention of the U.S., I also believe that there was enough support from the room for ICAO to carry on with the activities of looking into UTM and eventually, as it matures, developing standards. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Ayata, the statement read that the committee agreed that ICAO should continue serving as a global facilitator and forum in the development of the UTM system framework. Netherlands?
Yes. Sorry, thank you, Chair. Just coming back on the comments made on recommendation F with regards to the financial and personal support. The same text is also part of your working paper 6, which we will discuss later on, and on which we were intending to make a comment on the same issue. Could you please provide with clarity how you or the Secretariat will handle the comment to this recommendation F? Thank you.
Secretary?
Thank you. Yes, it will be deleted also from working paper 6.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. So we move to agenda item 5.3, remotely piloted aircraft systems. And you'll see the papers to be discussed on the screen. I now invite the Secretary to present working paper 6.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Working paper 6 describes opportunities and challenges presented by the operation of remotely piloted aircraft systems, RPAS. It also presents existing and future activities of ICAO for the development of the regulatory framework to support the integration of RPA, remotely piloted aircraft, into non-segregated airspace and aerodromes. Paragraph 1 recalls that RPAS, which offer a vast range of capabilities and sophistication, constitute a growing industry with considerable operational opportunities and economic potential. However, since their associated technologies, designs, and operating concepts are evolving rapidly, states are being challenged with a safe and efficient integration of RPAS into environments shared by a highly regulated and well-established manned aircraft industry. Paragraph 2 highlights the numerous applications associated with RPAS operations, as well as their potential economic benefits. It also highlights some of the challenges that must be addressed in order to permit the operation of RPA in non-segregated airspace and aerodromes, as well as the need for globally harmonized provisions for RPAS to support the development of required technologies and certification methods. This paragraph further describes ICAO's activities for the development of the regulatory framework necessary to support the integration of RPA, in particular, the organization's continuing efforts for the development of SARPs, PANs, and related guidance material, as well as implementation rollout activities. Action for the committee is in paragraph 3. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. I now invite Spain to present Working Paper 41.
Thank you, Chairman. It is an honor and a pleasure for me to present Working Paper 41 on non-segregated UAS operations on behalf of the 44 ECAC states, the European Union, and Eurocontrol. Paper 41 fully covers the UAS segment as well as upper airspace operations. It requests ICAO to, from the outset, establish clear provisions enabling states and regions to take actions in line with the global needs for harmonization and standardization in a proactive fashion. It presents the key components of the unmanned systems and integration with the manned systems. So we believe that integration is urgent and important for the aviation community. The new companies coming into the UAS industry are taking the lead in many technologies. As we can see, without a doubt, at the second Global Symposium on the air navigation industry and the Symposium on Safety Implementation, which took place in December 2017. We believe that ICAO should play a central role in collaborating with these new industries and linking them up to the various activities currently underway in the air navigation field in the various states and regional upgrade programs. This would make it possible to identify the potential of these new developments for the community and facilitate operational testing and concept validation, which in turn would lead to ICAO provisions and standards. And we could exploit synergies and work with interest groups in the military. With regard to UTM, the service environment is different from traditional ATM, so it's essential to fully gauge its impact and risks, but also opportunities. For example, how do these impact autonomous operations or operations with a high level of automation? As discussed, with regard to paper 37, under item 2.2, CNS technologies in the radioelectric spectrum will also be affected. In addition, it's expected that there will be a high demand for urban and suburban UAS, and ATM and UTM integration will be necessary given the large number of airports in these areas which are in a controlled airspace. For this reason, the introduction of UTM will be disruptive and will shake up ATM principles. We ask that ICAO should work to preserve interoperability together with states in accordance with the regional programs under the GAMP, and address problems and opportunities in the new environment. With regard to remotely piloted systems, RPAS, Working Paper 41 addresses two elements. One key enabler for integration of RPAS is detect and avoid systems and collision avoidance systems as a safety net for IFR RPAS operations, including the ability to avoid any objects and obstacles. The paper asks ICAO to work toward the standardization and harmonization of detect and avoid systems and collision avoidance, and to build on state and regional upgrade programs and focus on dual-use civil military equipment. Finally, Working Paper 41 addresses operations at a high altitude. There's an increasing demand for there to be very high-level autonomous operations. These operations have a very different maneuverability compared to the traditional manned operations, and occupy very high altitudes. In this context, we would like to delete a reference in Working Paper 41 in reference in conclusion 6.1d. We wouldn't like to get into legal delimitations and keep it broad. We would like for high altitude operations above flight level 600, such as long-term missions and suborbital operations. We believe that these operations pose major challenges, but at this time there are not very many standard operations. We call on ICAO to, together with states, prioritize the development of ATM measures which will allow for non-segregated operations and to create opportunities to develop the relevant SARPs. And with that, Chairman, the conference is invited to agree to the recommendations in paragraph 6.1. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Spain. Now invite Canada to present Working Paper 121.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Good afternoon to all. It is my pleasure to present this paper on behalf of Canada. This paper outlines Canada's decision to use the term remotely piloted aircraft systems, or RPAS, to describe drones and replace the previously used monikers unmanned aircraft systems and unmanned aerial vehicles. In Canada's experience, the current terminology employed by ICAO and the distinction made between model aircraft, drone, and RPAS are not clear-cut, nor are they adapted to current technology, operations, or the movement towards the regulation of operations according to risk versus the purpose of the flight, economic or recreational. Whether they are flown IFR or VFR, or large or small, RPAS have a pilot in charge. Sometimes the pilot is assisted by visual observers, payload operators, or communication operators. Some RPAS carry cargo, and in the not-so-distant future, they will likely carry passengers as well. Regardless, it is a fact that there is nothing unmanned about an unmanned aircraft system. We need to acknowledge this as a matter of principle. As you are aware, we are talking about a technology that is advancing rapidly. When we made naming decisions years ago, drone taxis seemed a distant reality. This is no longer the case. Our technological environment is shifting faster than we can predict. Nonetheless, our language must reflect advances in technology as well as the society in which we live. Remotely piloted accurately reflects the human agency and skill required by pilots to operate drones. The term unmanned, however, suggests that these machines are autonomous and free of human responsibility or oversight, which can evoke concern from the public who may have limited knowledge about drone technology. Moreover, the term unmanned holds strong gender connotations. Gender-neutral terminology signals that a field or job is open to everyone, regardless of a gender. Women are significantly underrepresented in aviation, including the drone industry. It would serve the industry well to follow the lead of NASA, who for over 10 years has used the term uncrewed instead of unmanned. This conscious decision serves as an indicator that participation in the field of aeronautics and space is not gender dependent. As society moves away from defined gendered roles and the notion of a fixed gender binary, language must also evolve. The Canadian government considers gender equality to be a priority, as does the UN, the G7, and a number of other ICAO member states. Given the ICAO Global Aviation Gender Summit in South Africa this summer, and the message of gender equality it espoused, ICAO member states are invited to reflect their commitment to gender equality in aviation by reconsidering the use of the term unmanned to describe aviation without a crew. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson.
Thank you, Colonel. United States, you're invited to present working paper 61.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since 2014, the Remotely Piloted Aircraft Systems Panel has been developing a regulatory concept to support states in the safe integration of RPAS. To support the panel in its role as the focal point and coordinator of all ICAO RPAS-related work, ICAO and states will need to focus on maturing the existing work program and synchronize projected delivery of SARPs, PANs, and guidance material through assignments to the technical expert groups. This approach will provide an opportunity to leverage additional data that may become available from many RPAS-related research and test programs currently ongoing around the world in support of decision-making for standards. Review and adoption of the proposed SARPs produced by the RPAS panel will require coordination across other Air Navigation Commission technical panels and expert groups, in addition to consultation with member states and the Council. In particular, panels will be expected not only to provide feedback and expertise to the new SARPs, PANs, and guidance material, but also to oversee, together with the Secretariat and the Commission, the amendment process incorporating these new provisions. Lessons learned from previous panel work have shown that significant collaboration among existing technical panels has been required for the successful and timely development of SARPs, PANs, and other guidance materials. The United States therefore seeks to ensure that panels and expert groups are prepared for this work. The RPAS panel assessment, along with the Secretariat assessment, shows that all 19 annexes will require amendment to incorporate RPAS-related provisions. The current panel activities timelines indicates that from 2018 to 2020, the panel will send its proposed amendments to Annex 2, 6, 8, 10, and 11 to the Secretariat to initiate review by the Air Navigation Commission and Council, which will be followed by consultation with states and ultimately incorporation into the annexes. Achievement of the RPAS panel's ambitious schedule for delivery of proposed amendments requires that technical panels and expert groups are both aware of the RPAS panel's activities and prepared to receive, review, and coordinate RPAS-related materials within the next 1 to 2 years, in addition to their existing work programs. Consequently, it is vital to update job cards for all of the affected panels and other expert groups to facilitate appropriate planning and ensure an integrated RPAS work program. The conference is invited to agree with the following recommendations identified in paragraph 3.1 of this working paper 61. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to present this paper on behalf of the United States.
Thank you, United States. I invite Council to present working paper 177.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon to you all. Remotely piloted aircraft operations are unique as they are controlled or linked through commands sent via radio line of sight or satellite frequency to an onboard computer that provides inputs to the aircraft flight control services. When an uplink that transmits commands and control, C2, instructions to the aircraft is not available, a condition commonly referred to as a lost C2 link will occur. When this occurs, the RPA reverts to flight routes, altitudes and airspeeds programmed into the remotely piloted aircraft system. prior to the lost C2 link condition to ensure the safe recovery of the remotely piloted aircraft. There is currently no ability for a remote pilot to electronically notify air traffic control that an RPA is operating in a lost C2 link mode. The use of secondary surveillance radar special codes 7600, which says radio failure, or 7700 emergency, indicates a system malfunction but does not accurately describe a lost C2 link contingency. Additionally, the lost C2 link condition may be momentarily or endure until an alternative C2 link becomes available, depending on the reason for the failure. When an RPAS enters a lost C2 link condition, the remote pilot loses the ability to manage the flight path of the RPA and a transition to a fully automated mode of flight. In many cases, dependent on aircraft and frequency configuration, the communication link between the remote pilot and air traffic control may also be disabled. However, the remote pilot will usually be able to contact ATC via alternate means of communication, telephone, via voice over IP, etc., in order to inform ATC of programmed flight path of the RPA. Due to this unique set of circumstances, ATC should immediately be aware when a lost C2 link event occurs. ATC may be notified via the flight plan or other means of the planned flight path of the RPA during a lost C2 link event. However, something would need to trigger the rapid search for and acquisition of such information to avoid ambiguity. Without a dedicated and discrete SSR code, it is not obvious how this would occur quickly in a high-pressure ATC environment. For this reason, CANSO proposes the use of 7400 as a SSR special purpose code to indicate that a remotely piloted aircraft is operating without a functional command and control link between the pilot and the remotely piloted aircraft. Therefore, the conference is invited to note the contents of the paper, make the recommendation in 4.3 a priority for ICAO, direct the establishment of 7400 as a Mode 3A SSR code for lost C2 link events, and direct the inclusion of the SSR code of 7400 for lost link events in ICAO annexes, PANs, and associated documents. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Council. May I have a show of support for this paper to be discussed? Thank you. I'd like to draw your attention to information papers 51, 192, 118, 276, and 258. I invite the Secretariat to provide any clarification. Okay, thank you. The floor is now open for discussion. Sweden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sweden would like to support the working paper 41 presented by Spain regarding non-segregated US operations, and we also support the stated recommendations in paragraph 6.1. We agree with Spain that the present issues in the paper needs consideration by ICAO to make the unmanned or uncrewed aircraft systems traffic management UTM concept a reality. It's also very important that ICAO define and promote core principles for unmanned or uncrewed aircraft system traffic management and for interoperability between UTM and ATM, and also to review some of the fundamental principles of aviation in this area. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Sweden. Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We support working paper 177 as presented by CANSO in principle, but wish to make a few comments. First of all, the solution in the paper, that is the issuance of an SSR special purpose code, can be supported with the provision that ATC be made immediately aware when a C2 link is lost, as is indeed noted in the body of the paper. It is important that such an event is distinguished from emergency or voice communications failure in order to clearly indicate that the remotely piloted aircraft is about to conduct a pre-arranged lost link maneuver. Such a clear indication would provide the necessary predictability and situational awareness for ATC to provide a safe operating environment. As working paper 177 correctly notes, Europe has experience from implementation projects that reveals that controllers prefer the use of a specific SSR code for such an event. Further thought needs to be put into the selection of this code. The RPAS panel reached consensus to use 7400 as a dedicated code. However, this code is used in some countries for security missions. Other studies have promoted the use of 7601 or 7602 as a lost C2 link event code, but this is considered by some experts as being too similar to the code used for voice communications failure. We suggest that more work should be done on this issue, and would like to remind the conference that any military requirements should be taken into due account before any decision is taken. Thank you.
Thank you, Denmark. Ayato.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon. In considering the inclusion of RPAS into what is currently considered civil airspace, IATA agrees with the concept that an RPAS is an aircraft. In this regard, consideration must be given to ensuring that exceptions to how these aircraft operate should be limited. Recent presentations at the ICAO RPAS 3 Symposia clearly show that RPAS operations will soon be interacting with all civil aircraft in all areas and at all altitudes. Therefore, ICAO must take action to increase the level of activity surrounding the development of standards for these aircraft. In doing so, serious consideration must be given towards seeking appropriate procedures for those RPAS that cross through the legacy airspace stratum as they climb to higher altitudes and ensure C2 link and DAA procedures are well-defined and coordinated. Whereas RPAS operations in non-segregated airspace may be less urgent, how to manage RPAS climbing to and descending from flight level 600 is a concern. Working paper 121 touches on an interesting item. Is it necessary to harmonize terms? And can we accept that all drones are RPAS or other terms? A simple search on the internet will display an answer to the first question. There are a number of ways to describe a UAS. With regard to working paper 177, which proposes a need to amend the list of beacon codes related to specific operations by assigning beacon code 7400 to C2 loss link events, IATA asks the conference to seek assurances by ICAO that this will not have a negative impact on ATM systems and SAR responses. Thank you.
Thank you. Poland.
Thank you, Chairman. And Poland would like to express our support to the working papers 41 presented by Spain with recommendations and the comment made by Sweden. We would like also to underline the needs of harmonization and standardization of detect and avoid capabilities required by the EFR flight rules, remotely piloted aircraft systems, and we find it as subject of a high priority. Poland supports the position of the United States expressed in working paper 61 presented by the US. We would like to underline that the proposed work should be in line with Global Air Navigation Plan and Global Air Safety Plan. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Poland. Singapore.
Thank you, Chairman. Singapore recognizes the need and supports the idea of a SSR code for lost C2 link events. This is with regards to Working Paper 177 by Council. However, Singapore would like to suggest that instead of creating a new family of 7400 SSR code, ICAO may wish to consider using a subset of the current 7600 communications failure SSR code, which would then ease the technical challenges and increase the speed of implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Singapore. China.
The Chinese delegation supports WP6 of the Secretariat. We also thank Working Paper 177 by Council. We should try to decide on the SSR code 7400 for lost C2 link is very important so as to work out the specific procedures for lost C2 link events. Thank you.
Thank you. New Zealand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. New Zealand supports Working Paper 121 submitted by Canada. In particular, it encourages states to replace terms such as unmanned aircraft and unmanned aerial vehicle with gender-neutral terms that are more inclusive of roughly 50% of the world's population. New Zealand also encourages ICAO to develop standardised terminology that avoids such gender-specific language. Thank you.
Thank you, New Zealand. It might be more than 50. United States.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The United States would like to support Working Paper 41 presented by Spain that was amended to take out references to suborbital and the Kármán line. In particular, the United States supports Recommendation A to encourage to make use of new entrants' wider pool of stakeholders. Recommendation B for the interoperability, and Recommendation D for ICAO to lead the development of ATM measures to enable unsegregated operations of high-altitude operations. Working Paper 41 covers a large number of interconnected topics in the United States, wishes to thank Europe for their holistic approach. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mali.
Thank you, Chairman. Mali supports Working Paper 6 by the Secretariat, in particular recommendations A, C, D, and E. Mali also supports Working Paper, the Working Paper presented by the U.S. Thank you.
Thank you. Australia.
Thank you, Chair. Australia supports the Working Paper 6 presented by the Secretariat and supports Working Paper 121 presented by Canada in relation to the use of RPAS. In relation to Working Paper 61 from the US, Australia supports the paper, but would like to suggest an additional sentence be added to it that says that ICAO ensure that Annex 17 security is prioritised to the level of the first tranche of Annex amendments in the RPAS work program. We believe that it is essential that security must be in part of the work of that work program up front, because without it, I just don't see how that work can proceed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Australia. Netherlands.
Thank you, Chair. Netherlands is happy to support Working Paper 6 of the Secretariat on RPAS and in general the proposed recommendations. With regard to Recommendation B, I thank the Secretariat for the explanation given by Working Paper 5. I would like to make two suggestions on Recommendations A and D. Firstly, on Recommendation A, we would suggest to use the expression RPAS, so including system, rather than RPA. We think that also this recommendation should refer to the complete systems and not only to the vehicle or aircraft. In case with this suggestion we would miss the specific intent of this recommendation, we would appreciate if the Secretariat could clarify why Recommendation A only speaks about RPA. Secondly, on Recommendation D, we would like to propose to expand this element to cover, next to the states, also the regional ATM modernization programs. The text would then read, D, urge states and air traffic management modernization programs to actively engage industry stakeholders to collect, etc., etc. Finally, I would like to express my sympathy for the Working Paper 121 of Canada and the intervention of New Zealand on this paper. Thank you.
Thank you. Netherlands. Venezuela.
Thank you, Chairman. The Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela supports Working Paper 6 by the Secretariat, in particular with regard to regulatory framework for integrating RPAS and non-segregated airspace and aerodromes. We hope that work will continue in capacity building and guidance material and providing more information to states. Working Paper 154 was presented before, and this contains similar concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Indonesia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Here, Indonesia welcome and support Working Paper 6 presented by Secretariat. Here, we highlight the request to ICAO for continue developing guidance material to support safe AirPass operations, to conduct awareness and educational activities amongst users, and to facilitate the collection and sharing of information among states regarding their AirPass regulation. In this regard, we agree with the Netherlands comment. And as the information referred to our information paper number 276, Indonesia is now updating our national regulatory in order to minimize the intrusion of the UAS operation and to improve the aviation safety by invited relevant stakeholder to conduct the enforcement for the unauthorized operation of the UAS. In this regard, we also agree with Denmark's comment to involve military side. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Nigeria.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Nigeria supports Council Working Paper 177 with respect to the establishment of SSR code 7400 for the loss of C2 link, as against the use of 7600 for radio communication failure, considering the C2 link being a command and control link. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Council.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will keep it short because we're waiting for coffee. I just want to support the paper 61 from the US. The cross-disciplinary approach is very important between all panels in ICAO related to RPAS articles. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Rwanda.
Thank you. Rwanda supports Working Paper 61 submitted by the United States. We acknowledge their drive in what they have stated as an ambitious timeline to achieve delivery of a comprehensive initial suite of SARPs and PANs, but are appreciative that the United States realizes that coordination with panels is no short or easy task. Therefore, we see the paper as relevant as it gives a detailed order of addressing the issues as stated in paragraph 2.5 and recommendations as stated in 3.1a through d. In regards to Working Paper 121, we support the subject of RPAS. However, in principle, or let me rephrase, however, we do not believe that this was not the intent of ICAO in regard to gender inequality. We do believe that the Working Paper 121 regarding the wording unmanned may deserve some research or statistical analysis to the viability of an alternative term. Thank you.
Thank you, Rwanda. Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to reiterate our support for Working Paper number 61 and Working Paper number 177. Canada has already commented on Paper 141 as part of the previous agenda item. Our comments hold. On Working Paper number 6, Canada supports the paper by Secretariat, noting the reservation that was issued by the Secretariat at the beginning of this conversation. We thank the other countries that have commented on Paper 121.
Thank you, Canada. Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Chair. Republic of Korea support Working Paper 6 by Secretariat and Working Paper 121 by Canada, gender neutral term. And regarding Working Paper 177, SSR Core 7400 for lost the C2 link event, we fully agreed on the Singapore's comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Cameroon.
Merci. Thank you, Chair. Cameroon supports Working Paper number 121 from Canada regarding harmonization of terminology. We thank Canada for designating RPS rather than using UAS or UAV, and also to have added qualifiers to RPASs in order to distinguish between the different vehicles in that category. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take the final comment from India and then sum up.
Good afternoon, Chairman. Thank you very much. We strongly support paper WP06 with a request to ICAO that to develop standards and recommended practices for integration of RPAS into non-segregated airspace on priority. And we would like to prefer to use the term RPAS. Thank you.
Thank you, India. Just give us a couple moments. Okay, thank you. As a summary, conclusions to 5.3. There was broad support from the Committee for Working Paper 6 from the Secretariat with regards to Working Papers 41, 121, 61, and 177. The committee recognized the importance of prioritizing development of the regulatory framework necessary to support the integration of RPAS into non-segregated airspace and aerodromes, including through enhanced support from relevant ICAO expert groups. The committee requested ICAO to consider gender-neutral terminology through appropriate research. Wide support was provided to urge states to collect and share information on RPAS operations. The committee urged states to actively engage industry stakeholders to collect and provide technical data to ICAO on RPAS operations in order to support the development of SAPs for RPAS, including for DAA and C2 link. And the committee agreed that ICAO should review potential ramification from the establishment of 7400 or alternative as a secondary surveillance radar code for lost C2 link events. The committee agreed ICAO should continue developing guidance material to support safe RPAS operations, to conduct awareness and educational activities amongst users, and to facilitate the collection and sharing of information among states regarding their RPAS regulations. Are there any remarks to the summary? Thank you. I see none. So we can close agenda item 5.3 and adjourn for coffee. Thank you.